This is a Niche Radio podcast. Subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or log into www.nicheradio.co.za.
Welcome to SuperDads. Wow, we are just blessed more and more with these different interesting guests we have in our show. And today is definitely no exception. Today we have representative from the National Alliance Against Cell Phone Masts, Derek Maine, and one of the other founders is Niki Moore. She's down in Durban. And then we have your other support, the names
is Lisa and Matt Bube-Kramer.
Lisa and Matt Bube Kramer.
Yes.
We'll get the spelling correct on the show notes for you. And we were thankfully, or what your organization does, from my understanding, it's one of the next cycles in the run of, about over a decade ago, there was Tracy Lee Doring and Nikki Benjamin, and they're still around, the EMRSA, Exponential Field Radiation Society.
Yeah.
And then from that, you had spreading off to Cape Town. There was a Strawberry Lane with Justine. Mm-hmm. And that sort of also spurred again with Dave and Vilma Miles from EMF-SA.
Yes.
And, everyone is incrementing this place, and it's quite a difficult torch to carry through this whole process, and it is difficult. And now your organization's popped up and going more nationally, and sort of your focus on getting more the legal frameworks of actually getting the mechanisms to court. And one of our previous guests on the show was Advocate Carlo Viljoen, who's one of the members who's sort of helping you with putting the stuff together.
That's right.
And tell us more about sort of why you hear your personal story and sort of what's it all about.
Okay, well, thanks very much for the opportunity, first of all. I became involved when we had a cell mast application in our area. And I'd heard of the harms of EMF before that, but I didn't really take too much notice. And only when I started doing research for my objection to the application did I realize what a fraud was taking place and what the issues were that people were facing. And I was amazed to find of the people you mentioned that have been fighting these issues for decades. And I just felt that, well, first of all, I was totally shocked at the fraud. And I thought there was something that needed to be exposed, and people need to be made aware of the issues and the health risks. And so I felt that the way that we needed to tackle it is to try and draw everybody together, to try and have a combined front, and to share resources and ideas and knowledge so that we can tackle this collectively. Because I just feel that if we try to fight it individually on our own, we're going to get picked off by the cell companies, and they've got massive resources. They'll just drag it out in court and chew up our money and time and eventually win anyway. So I think that instead of fighting individual cases, we would prefer that it becomes a class action suit, that we settle it once and for all, that there's some ruling that the health risks have to be re-looked at, all the research has to be studied and come to a view where everybody is aware of what the risks are, and then we can make an informed decision on how we go forward. I'm certainly not a Luddite. I don't expect to roll back the clock. I don't imagine that we'll get rid of cell phones. I don't think it's desirable that we do, because it is a useful technology. But I do think that we need to look at limiting our exposure as much as possible. We need to be aware that there are risks and try and limit and we need to have warnings, wherever there is Wi-Fi technology that is in use, so that people who do suffer from the effects of EMF radiation can either avoid those places or take due precautions when they go into those kind of areas. Yeah. And since it is radiation that we're talking about, there is a need for warnings to be out there. I mean, we have awareness campaigns of solar radiation, for example. Everybody knows that it's harmful to be in the sun, and we take precautions. You put on sunscreen, or you don't go out in midday sun, those kind of things. There are those awareness campaigns out there for that kind of radiation. So why isn't there the same awareness campaign for EMF radiation?
And to explore it. When you saying here EMF radiation, you focusing only on the wireless part of it?
No, we need to put out there all the harms that are EMF radiation is a cause of, and deal with them and come to some decision on how we're going to deal with them and how we're going to regulate them. It doesn't matter what the source is. I mean, if they're harmful, then we need to look at it.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what becomes very tricky with the literature, is that it tends to be very discriminatory. It would break between the extremely low magnetic fields, and you get the radio frequency, and you get the ultra high frequencies.
Yes.
And also they would then miss out, okay, you also have the visible spectrum. So there's the blue light toxicity aspect.
Yeah.
And something mentioned earlier about the solar radiation thing, putting on sunblock, and the reality actually putting on sunblock is really bad. And one actually wants to be out in the sun more. But the problem is that even with these different wireless radiations and what it does to the cells and dehydrates the cells, being in the sun, you're then not able to produce vitamin D. So you're becoming like the different clinicians I talk with, then have farmers coming in and they highly dark and tanned, but their vitamin D levels are shot.
Yeah.
And so it's about how does the protocol need to adjust, because everyone gets over concerned of it's just the one radiation and it's just tackle, regulate that area. But it's actually different forms. And what's difficult for clinicians is that, one, it's more a physics problem, and two, that different spectrums of radiation are going to manifest different symptoms.
Yeah.
And it becomes very easy for industry to say, well, we funded this study and that study, and we saw an effect there, we didn't see an effect there, and therefore everything else must be dissolved. Where in reality, diabetes, asthma, and obesity, those are all effects of radiation. Tendinitis is an allergy to radiation.
ADHD is one of them as well.
It is. All these things, and that's more focused on the blue light aspect, even adrenal fatigue syndrome. And there's a difficulty because compared to the US, we have a different manifestation. We're more linked to Europe because of our electrical power grid being in the 50 hertz. Where the US 60 hertz has a different interaction with the harmonics of the body. So that's why their issue of the EHS, or the intolerance to the radiation, is coming from migrants coming from Europe into the United States, and then these things manifesting. So it gets very, very complicated. And like saying, the thing is, we can't remove technology. It has to be regulated and pioneered to actually innovate new technology. Because there are ways it can be modified that actually produces some beneficial health aspects, which ends up being a mitigation option to the other effects. And it's complex. Like you said, let's bring out all the science and let's review it. And in many ways, it's not needed because countries around the world have done that already. There's no need for reinventing the wheel. As we said before, there was recently the Russian World Cup, and Russia has a very strong and good EMF regulatory system that's proven very effective. Same with China and that.
That's pretty much because they've done their own research and they know that there are serious biological effects, harmful effects, and that's why they've set their exposure limits much lower than the ICNRP limits. I mean, they know from their research that there are harms.
Well, all of them understand there is the harms. It's just in terms of cultural practice and cultural view. So if you're talking to a 21-year-old who wants to be a renegade and saying, I can have a few more extra beers and I can just drive a little bit faster in this time of day and night. And that's sort of maybe what the ICNIP thing is. It's okay. It's all good. I'm driving a 600,000 rand car and it's got all airbags, everything's safe. Versus the others that go, well, we need to have these traffic light signals and these imposed restrictions because life is non-linear and there's not just one thing that's a relationship, and we have to look at the bigger picture of things. And, when one is hampered, how is it fair to ask a question of, okay, your daughter was now hit by a drunken driver or something. So your daughter was hit by a drunken driver and, you're kind of going, well, it's okay because we don't need to impose more restrictions because they're going to cost the budget more. So how do you tell a parent who's lost their loved one to something that could be avoided that it's in the greater economic interests for other certain parties that we should not impose additional restrictions?
Yeah, that's true. We should
So tell me more about sort of, more the details of, like you said the word, there's evidence of fraud. Now, I mean, that's quite a big claim and allegation. And, people might say, well, it could put you at risk of defamation. But again, it's only defamation if you can't prove it.
Well, I think personally that there's some things that need to be said. And just from the claims that WHO and the ICNIRP make, when they say that there are no known adverse health effects. Now, that is such a huge claim to make. When clearly there's lots of research that shows there is concern of the health effects. And in fact, we've known this for more than half a century, that there are harms of EMF radiation. There was a study done by Van Umerson in 1963 where he took egg embryos, fertilized egg embryos, and he raised the temperature of the egg to 3 degrees above their normal incubation temperature using EMF. And he found that there was retardation and inhibition of growth of all sorts of areas of the embryo. And there was a problem with cell differentiation. And so then what he did was he heated the control eggs to also 3 degrees above using conventional heating, and there were no abnormal effects. So that, to me, says that EMF radiation causes biological effects. And this is from 1963. So we've known for a very long time that there are health effects. And to make a bold-faced statement that there are no adverse health effects is just an absolute lie. It's fraud.
Yeah. Now, there's 2 books that's actually very useful for persons who have trouble interpreting the science. Reading papers it requires a certain skill set. It's difficult searching, and it can be costly. So I mean, you have David Becker with The Electric Effect, his book. You have Dr. Andrew Marino and Going Somewhere book, and those books are really excellent textbooks that take all these papers and references and put them in a very chronological order, and they provide such a easy to follow narrative to go, okay, I'm not crazy. There is something here. It explains those different relationships. Obviously, other complementary books that work with it, but those 2 books work well. Probably, if you want as an introduction, reading Andrew Marino's book, The Going Somewhere, is probably the easiest go-to book for most people. I know you also have Deborah Davis, her books, and Ola Johansson, his papers and that. But yeah, we want to encourage people, from my understanding, is rather get a hardcover book like that, sit in the sun or by the beach and have a good read, because in doing that in that environment, you are going to raise your dopamine levels and you are going to be able to make more connections and say, okay, what can be done about it? But what you're trying to do is, there's no longer this requirement to just review papers or studies, because the harms are real. Cell towers are going up faster than we can think of. And they're going, in order to meet the 5G rollout requirement by 2019, 2021, those type of periods. We already have 5G testing in Pretoria, and we're seeing the effects on complainants over there. It's already been on military bases, but each 5G in each part of the world is going to be different based on topology and infrastructure. So it's important to actually put the adjustments and regulatory systems in place now versus waiting to go what's happening. And it's difficult because working on this whole thing of the social media masses or the trolls, and I'm saying, I need my dopamine fix because I want to have my 4K Netflix on my phone or my tablet, and don't restrict me, and it looks unsightly to have cables. And fair in some ways, marketing is designed to be sexy. It's designed to create appeal. But in South Africa, because our law works on a place of principle, we want to discourage drug dealers running the country. And essentially that's what this technology does. It affects the brain chemistry, so it is going to create this addictive issue, hence the opioid crisis and those thoughts. So it's important to actually protect children, because remember, this is what became part of the whole teaching crisis, called the oven bake effect, where you first have to make the dough, put them on a cookie tray, put them in the oven, and then set for a bit, and then you put them out onto shelf for selling. And each of those have a timely life cycle in order to have a consistent pattern. But when you interrupt, say, the time process of putting the ingredients together, or the dough, and then sitting in the oven, and that's why we started having this teacher crisis of not being able to have enough teachers in the schools or the curriculum or studying. Now we're having the same thing with the workforce of, you're having this workforce coming up, And with each generation coming in with the mitochondrial damage from the radiations, is that kids are having their brains less and less myelated, meaning less and less developed. And when it comes to actually them having to perform the work, it becomes a thing of more of a reason to become corrupt. And more corruption, because how can I find the quickest fix and not do the work because I know I can't do it? And we don't want to have this political, social BS thing of outsourcing everything outwards. And that's why also they argue this BE story isn't working. And it's not working because, as you know, in South Africa, it comes more down to genetics, where we have a thing called coupled and uncoupled haplotypes. And what that means is, because it's sort of 50-50 ratio, how the radiation affects them and the mitigation options is very different. So our rainbow nation effect is even more complex than a European scenario, or even more complex than an American scenario, because we're having to do these different strategies and different cultural changes in order to create these developments. And that's why we see such an outburst now of diabetes becoming so prevalent. And where it's not a thing about carbs or sugars, it's about how the radiation is having this non-linear catalytic effect on these impacts. But it's hard, because when you're a low dopamine person, you're a low dopamine asshole. Just many of the doctors you've probably visited are in that state. They're in very high radiation environments. They're having trouble connecting the dots. And that's why even when I consult them and teach them, it's a process. And it first takes them to have their own body failure to sort of go, okay, this is how I can help myself and help my patients. Well,
one of your previous guests actually raised the issue, as you say, it's not a science issue anymore. The science is clear that it's harm. It's more a media and awareness issue. And that's exactly, you talk about the person wanting the Netflix. I don't mind so much. Okay, I understand that they want to use the technology, but they need to be aware as well. They need to be made aware of the harms, and then make a choice and decide, okay, well, I'm prepared to accept the harms and I want my Netflix anyway. But that also, you raise the point of addiction. And I think then we need to start looking at a problem of addiction, cell phone addiction, because if you know all the harms and you say, oh, well, I'm going to carry on regardless, then what makes you different to a heroin addict who knows all the harms of using the drug but has to continue using it? You're exactly the same. We have an addiction problem then, and we need to deal with that.
Yeah, and that's why in psychiatry it has a DSM label to it. And where the definition expands that, as you said, a person knows they're doing harm, but they feel helpless to do anything about it, and they keep doing it. So that's why I put in these regulatory mechanisms. And in one way, it's a good thing that people are getting more sick or more ill, because then it creates more of an awareness that there's problems. The downside is when it's too slow and it starts affecting us personally. So, when you're having this opioid addiction crisis, particularly like in Cape Town, people are switching more to this whole tick problem. And now tick, again, really more destroys the prefrontal lobes of the brain. What that means is that a person's ability to cognate between right or wrong is abolished. And then those same people, which can be your neighbors, are now holding a gun or driving a car, and it's not just yourself, your loved one, or your children that are in the firing line. And we see it in schools. I mean, this thing of more suicide, more depression, more school shootings, more police shootings even now so. When we see the work of Barry Trower, and also back again to Marino Becker, where the studies go, how can you manipulate the brain waves to have these kind of effects? And we see it's like this diminished effect on the chemistry in the brain in different areas that puts one more at a statistical risk of having these outbursts and these issues. And people want to say, oh, you must have more faith or more connected. But we know that with our mitochondria, it is our sixth sense in our body. And the way that non-ACMF inhibits that function and actually clogs it up, it then removes our connection to God. So how can one want to be a person of faith if they're not able to separate these influences on it? And it's difficult, because if you go to a judge and you say, oh, this person committed this crime because their brain chemistry was off. And we kind of go socially, well, we don't care, just execute the person. We don't want them in society. They should have known better. So
it's almost like you should be able to use a temporary insanity defense, because your brain's affected externally and out of your control, kind of thing. It makes you act in certain ways.
And we see this with children. I mean, I assume you have children yourself.
I have 3 boys, yes.
Yes, and this whole thing of, I know one of the other persons were talking about how a child would go into an environment where it's much high densification of the non-native EMF, and the next day he's having trouble disciplining his child, or his son, because it's an issue of, normally the son's well behaved, no issues, but he's just having this erratic, out of control outbursts and not knowing how to deal with it. And so you try to say, well, you need just to man up and learn between right and wrong. But again, if your hormones, even at teenagehood, boyhood, you remember being a boy, there was that excuse before if it was just hormones.
Yeah.
Now it's no longer just nature hormones, it's even worse.
Mm-hmm.
Being indoors makes it worse, and these aspects.
Yeah.
And it's sort of, how do you tackle? I mean, you being a dad yourself, part of you being a guest, you're a super dad because you've seen a realization, you making steps and efforts to regulate and protect your personal environment and that of your family. Hence the starting of the group. But how do you sort of manage it with your own boys? I mean, it's difficult for them to socialize with others, and
I don't really. They're a lot older now, so I mean, I can't really tell them what to do. I mean, they've got to decide what they want to do now, and all I can really do is try and guide them and try and make them aware of the issues that I've become aware of, and try and educate them and tell them, you need to make choices and be aware of the consequences of your choices. That's all I can do.
So, I mean, you have grandchildren yet or not
No.
yet? Okay, so that's...
But I mean, that's the whole thing, that this EMF issue is it's a long-term issue. It's going to have consequences for decades to come, for generations to come. So it has to be dealt with now, especially with the 5G, as you were talking about, being rolled out now. Now is the time to act, because it'll be too late in 5 years' time.
Yeah.
It'll all be rolled out. And, as we know, getting them to take down cell masts is a lot more difficult than stopping them putting up cell masts in the first place. So we need to act right now.
Well, it's yes, if we want to economically survive, we have to, because that's why President Putin's famous speech in their parliament was, we don't need to go to war with America. They're busy, taking care of their own fertility issues themselves,
Yep.
where they're using their power grid and their systems. And that's why Russia has a more social accounting system, which is what South Africa is meant to embody, has those principles of, we work in the Batupela principle. It's about putting the people first. And we don't care about, people toying for the sake of their addiction, wanting things, and that's why I guess the West always likes to propaganda, China and Russia saying, oh, they're just human rights harming people and they don't buy things. But when you have children that are throwing tantrums, you sometimes need to be harder. That's why we work on a legislation of principles. It's what's going to work to the best protection.
Yep.
I always like to reference back to the whole thing of the Germans and how the Germans do things versus the Africans or the Americans kind of thing. And it very much comes down to cultural practice. And what you've done with this your group is that you're focusing on how do you change these communities and their cultural choices and their cultural practices,
Yes.
and implementing these type of bylaws for each community.
Correct.
So like for German, we always see it on the famous shows like Top Gear or the Greatest Race kind of thing, where if you ask the German, if your license expired or you don't have one, do you still drive your car, take the risk? And they say, what you talking about? No, just hop in, if you have to get somewhere, you go. No, it's just not done. We don't do it.
No, they're straight down the line, definitely.
And where in South Africa, it's kind of going, especially the cell towers. I know one of our first legal guests, he said they take chances because, hey, who knows? We don't have to follow all the regulations. And when they miss just one step, that already works in court for the matter to be overturned, which works to administrative processes favorably. But again, this cultural practice in South Africa, we have the thing of windows must always be closed. There's no fresh air. Lights must be on. The aircon must be on. Where again, going back to the Germans, it's a thing of, no, you do not put the aircon on. This is frowned upon. You leave the windows open if you want fresh air.
Yeah.
You don't switch on the lights if it's daytime and sunlight outside. Where again, our practice of, we are shunned if we want to connect with nature, if we want to get native EMF in our environments to balance us out.
Yes.
Instead, we are wanting to reward this culture of non-native EMF. And it is challenging with, to trying to learn the physics, because you yourself, you don't understand all the science and the physics.
No, I don't.
And
I'm learning all the time, but I certainly don't know it all.
And it's challenging because when you're then trying to talk or explain certain things to your loved ones or to community, and it becomes a thing of you only know some of it, and then you're trying to explain it, it's like a half-truth, which then becomes a lie. Then it starts sounding like pseudoscience. And that's what ICNIP will go, you don't know what you're talking about because you don't even know what this acronym means, kind of thing.
Quite right.
And that's what I enjoy with my work, is being in these community talks, or part of the show is to create this more awareness. So when they do say something like that, you can go, hold on, what about this part, or what about that part? And you get just a little bit of extra information. And then it's no longer a thing of you're a crazy whack job. You're actually a good community leader. You're a super dad to explore those things.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, like I say, I'm learning all the time, and I've got a lot more to learn. And, I was totally oblivious to it 6 months ago. I mean, January was when we started our objection to the cell mast. Before that, I had no idea. So,
and the interesting thing is, when you have a gun to your head or a knife to your back, or whatever it is, you quickly learn and you switch on to get whatever you can. And it's not this scenario of, like you said, it's just been a few months, but you've learned an immense lot. And it's not this thing of, well, let's see how many degrees you have and how long you've done this and that. Because academia is not going to save one in this kind of thing. It's, again, social and cultural force. Because even some of the guests we have, a recent one, even Professor David Carpenter, he even said that the difficulty with doing research or papers is that even if you're a scientist, you want to say the truth or what the fact is, you are restricted to using the straight words if it's seen as too controversial. The reviewers won't let you publish your work. Or if you give a policy recommendation, they say, no, you can't publish. So it's all these difficulties, and that's why we actually end up going to court. Because we look to a judge, hopefully is meant to be that embodiment of an impartial party who listens to both sides of the story and applies his mind of what is needed for the people. And that's why we can't say no cell towers at all, because there's circumstances where it needs to be erected, and there's parts where it doesn't have to, and there's parts where there's alternative technologies. We want to disrupt knowledge, we want to have opposition, because that's actually what's going to drive new innovations, and not this whole thing of who has more likes on Facebook.
Yes. Yes, so there was on a forum, I had a discussion argument with somebody, and that was one of the things that came up, that they want to have the technology and they want to have access to social media, etc. And my comment was, well, so you'll be dying of cancer, but hey, at least you can post your meals on Facebook, photos of your meals on Facebook. I mean, that's the attitude, really. I mean, people, it's an addiction. Yeah.
And again, I just mentioned the word cancer. It's always that nice hot trigger word. But when we look at the actual manifestations of mitochondrial-related diseases, 95% of illnesses people experience is epigenetic. It's not really genetic kind of thing. So as a result of that, it's not necessarily you're going to die of cancer. There's so many other things out there that is the case. I mean, we have with pancreatic cancer, it used to be, number 100. Now it's like up to, in the top 5 of leading causes of death. And that's purely because of placement of technology and where it is more so than other aspects. Yes, it's a non-linear effect, but we want to see, okay, there's the dementia, there's the Alzheimer's, there's the heart attacks, there's the strokes, all these other little small things, the diabetes like we just mentioned. So it is difficult. And we see this with epidemiology data of, they say in the municipal document, Cape Town has become a connected city.
Yes.
And when we look at the epidemiology of connected cities around the world now, the lifespan, or expected lifespans of persons is actually decreasing.
Really?
And it's not a case of a person getting to an older age and slowly, phasing out. It's they're getting to 60, 70 and they're in diapers. It's getting to the stage of you having 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, but more coming now 20-year-olds in the ICU with heart attacks and strokes.
Frightening.
And the diabetes thing, it's massive. And you have these guys going, I don't understand what I'm doing wrong. And it's difficult for clinicians because clinicians aren't really trained to deal with these type of chronic ailments. They do very well surgeries, cutting, fixing bones, those kind of things. But these other kind of diseases, it's challenging.
Yeah, sure it is. But I think with the more it happens, the more they'll become affair with the symptoms and those sort of things that they need to look out for. So unfortunately, it's going to have to get worse before it gets better. I mean,
yeah, and it's challenging because in the mix of it, you also have these integrative medicine doctors or functional medicine practitioners that want to come in and make a good buck out of anyone. I mean, it's the whole thing of, hey, it's just you need more diet, you need more exercise, you need to spend $3,000 a month on supplements or go for this 20-something thousand rand blood panel work. And it makes no difference.
Yep.
And
well,
say,
sometimes I think it's just a hit and miss operation. I mean, try this, if that doesn't work, come back, try this. It's kind of a never-ending story.
Well, it's an issue where they don't understand the physics and how it links to it. And everyone on this bandwagon, I need to detox. With non-native EMF, detoxing is the worst thing you can do. Because already you got the leaky gut, leaky brain. Why would you want to lose more nutrients? It's not going to get you better. And that's why we focus on this thing called a redox protocol, and these different implementations to get one better.
Okay.
But the reality is that even if you make these adjustments, you cannot get a person better if you don't attend to the environment first.
Yep.
So that's why a person would do certain things, get to a certain degree maybe, but they can't get over their stepping stone because, like in the case you're objecting, you put a cell phone tower there, they're never going to get better. Yep. You're putting smart meters, they're never going to get better.
Yeah, otherwise, you're just treating the symptoms. You're never going to get to the cause.
Well, it's not that. They get worse because the body cannot achieve a higher redox potential. It's so damaged. So that's all the more reason why then you're having to go the extra mile of, we are protecting ourselves. This person, as one with the Indian High Court order of the precautionary principle, that this technology cannot be implemented or has to be done differently or different technology for the same purpose. Otherwise, the person's not going to get better.
Yep. And
thankfully, our law does recognize that. But it's, again, understanding how to do that communication and how to work with it. And we know the famous saying of, in court, the telecoms would go, well, do you have a cell phone? Yes, then don't complain.
Yes, I've had that exactly. Cell phones are more dangerous than cell towers.
And there's different mitigation options. But again, there's a difference, as you said, it's between a macro technology and a micro technology. Micro environment, you have a choice to use your cell phone or not, or have in your home or not, and
I can use a hands-free kit to try and limit my exposure.
Or a landline, any of those
things. Not
things.
Use a phone,
switch
it off when I'm not using it. There's things you can do to mitigate that, but with cell tower, you can't.
You can never switch it off.
Yep.
And that's why other countries around the world, they actually have these implementations of when the tower is on, even at restricted levels, it can only be at certain transmissions for so many hours a day. It can't be in the evenings and these different factors.
Well, that's what I think we need. We need some kind of regulation of what's happening here, because at the moment it's just a free-for-all. They're putting up masts illegally, as you say. So there needs to be some regulation, like, for example, not near creches, not near schools. In fact, now schools are putting on their own properties, they're putting up cell masts. I mean, it's ludicrous.
Yeah.
So there needs to be that regulation. There needs to be signage, like I say, for wherever there's Wi-Fi. They need to tell people what's happening. And in France, anybody can go and get the readings of cell towers and find out what the emission levels are. It's public knowledge. They have to supply that. Why don't they do that here? Yeah. So that we can go and see whether they're complying with the levels. At the moment, they say we're complying with the IC and RP levels. How do we know that? They might be pumping it way above the levels. We would never know.
Well, it depends on the circumstance. There's many ways in which it would be above, but even the ICNIB levels, again, why would you even want to compete with it? Why would you say, are they, going exceeding the level? It's not, because it's a thermal limit. We're not worried about that. That's why I would advocate rather, ask, okay, are they doing the Italian level? Are they doing the Paris level? Are they doing the Russian or the Chinese or any one of those and the major macro countries? So that's more important argument to ask, because then it's a different thing of, because ICNIP isn't a country. Yeah. It's a lobbyist group. Yes. It's an NGO. Exactly. So where does it actually have a statutory body working with it?
It seems they are not answerable to anybody at all. That's the way it seems to me. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they're answerable to everybody, but even their own guidelines says that industry is not allowed to use them as a defensive wall. So when they say, "Oh, we follow ICNIRP guidelines," that's not something that's good enough or an explanation for it. So it is useful in those regards, and that's why, as I foresee it, the way you're lobbying with the different groups, Masts is going to end up in court. It's going to most likely be favorable based
seems
on...
that's the only way.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't seem like the cell industry can be reasoned with. They're going to carry on regardless.
It's not about reason with, it's that they're just doing their fiduciary duty. Remember, they work on a market system. They're required to report to their shareholders.
Sure. But my take is that it can't be at any cost. You can't have the cell industry grow at the cost of our health. That's just not... First of all, it's not sustainable for them. I mean, if their client base is becoming ill, they're not going to be able to afford cell technology anyway. I mean, it's self-defeating.
No, why not? I mean, you have companies like, for example, Monsanto, and they were about to be, I think, bought up by Bayer, where, again, the way they've had to modify the crops because of how it affects, the radiation affects the calcium levels and that such, they already know what medications need to come out to counter it. So, these cell companies, again, they always have to innovate. They always have to find ways to innovate their shareholders. That's why they've been going more into this office supply tech support, more this control of, let us do mHealth and it's a better thing. So there is always going to be a way for them because that's, again, their duty. They are required to do that. So, my thoughts of a strategy of going to try sue a cell phone company is wasteful and wrong because it's going to be in there for years. And rather, it's a thing of you are needing to sue the state.
Yeah, I think the health department's got a lot to answer for.
Well, it's not the health department, it's the municipality. Because there is no national regulation, and the Constitution mandates and empowers the municipality to generate bylaws in order to develop a more comprehensive national system. And like you said, there's fraud with the whole permit process going erected. We had the recent Telkom court matter where it was validated that a bylaw that instituted the action is viable and it's not against national legislation. So if your city officials are not following processes, they're not listening to you, then it's more effective to sue the state because there's no backlash if you lose.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean,
for me, suing the state is almost self-defeating as well because, we're paying those taxes that they're going to, whatever damages claims you get from them, that comes from our taxes. So it's basically we're suing ourselves.
It is because we are damaging ourselves, but then afterwards it becomes the responsibility of the state to sue the cell company. So you as a private individual, like you said, they've got massive bucks and can hold you in court for ages and they can threaten you all these difficult things. Where if it's a state going against a private industry, it's a whole different mandate and a whole different empowerment because a judge is then required to apply his mind differently. If it's just a private industry, yes, there's more complication, whatnot. But on administrative law, the way our principles work with South African legislation, it's safer, quicker, and more efficient to develop national legislation by suing the state, even if you want to sue the Department of Health. But from the wording that the Department of Health has done, from the original citing, you can do it in different ways, but the way that you think of just you haven't protected the people, it will be difficult to win. Just because of they've just had their original communication that's been reinterpreted with a broken telephone with other parties. And everyone started believing that. So yes, you can sue those parties for going, you did your job of not looking at the original source. So if you're being lazy, that's your fault.
I do think they're being derelict in their duties because they just sort of parrot the ICNRP statements about no health effects, and they don't do any kind of research or study any other research besides the ICNRP. So I think that's their jobs. They should be doing that. They should be not just taking ICNRP's word for it. They should also do their own investigation and see. Surely they must be aware of this whole controversy. They can't not know about it.
Well, it's difficult for them if one person just goes up and say, well, they'll commonly say a Google search or PubMed search. And the first thing comes up is the ICNIRP funded study. And we know with Google and advertising, you can just pay money to have your documents put at the very top. And we know people being lazy and low dopamine, they're going to be in that state of looking for the first thing they can, because why must I go further? Why must I connect the dots? So for them as an official, again, this stuff can be complex. There isn't that cultural training. I mean, we know in South Africa, our STEM education is terrible in terms of physics in school isn't really taught. And the physics that is taught is different to what's taught in Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
So that's why when it comes even to helping, I know we're working with treating people with these ailments that come from Eastern European bloc countries versus people from the US, it's a lot quicker for them to get the picture and learn and apply it because they have that physics training. They got that background. So in South Africa, not having this mandate of physics and learning, or even this very selective physics, you're never going to have that kind of encouragement. And the physics or the scholarships that you do get is mainly for cell phone telecom companies, wireless Wi-Fi, or internet, or electricity, ESCOM kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So if you trained, and it's a very clever tactic. It works very well. You're funding persons that's going to defend your science and your mandate. That works well.
Yeah, sure. And they've got the money to do that.
Well, everyone has the money. I mean, you have a purchasing power.
I do, but I mean, if you look at a cell mast in your area, that at a stroke of a pen, they destroy an entire community because, first of all, you're going to be using up your time and effort to fight, to raise your objection to the cell mast. That's going to take up time. Then your property value is going to drop once they got the cell mast up by 15 to 30%. So your investment immediately takes a knock. Yeah. Then you're going to have health effects for the rest of your life. And you're going to be paying for medical treatments, etc. So a whole community is destroyed just by that one action.
And you experience yourself actually getting a community together is really difficult.
Especially when it comes to raising the money.
Yes.
That gets very difficult.
Because, I mean, I don't know what your cost budgets have been or how you distribute it amongst people. But, I mean, you managed to get Advocate Viljoen to come through for a community meeting. And unfortunately, it turned out wasn't what you were hoping for.
No, it wasn't.
And, I mean, it's normal. It happens like that. But you have another meeting in succession.
Getting used to that.
Yeah. As you have successions, it does actually start to improve. But again, the nice thing with our legislation is that you don't need a big toy. You don't need 1,000 people to have the law changed.
Yeah.
Just a small group to demonstrate public interest is enough. And that's how Strawberry Lane was so successful.
Yeah. They had a great campaign.
Yeah, but it's, again, like they said, it's taxing to, right, everyone, let us sacrifice your important Saturday afternoons or this day and let's put our picket fence up and let's do it. And then there's also the cultural aspect of, it's only a white man's disease.
Yeah. It's a long slog. It's a long slog.
But in my experience and people I'm engaging with and the reviews of organs of state I get on my government-funded study, there's optimism. There's things that people going, yes, if you have a better way, let's hear it out. Let's implement it. But it's a thing of, again, like we deal with politics, you have 50-50 kind of thing. So even within the city, you have the one half that wants to do something, the other half that's saying, you're going to put your job at jeopardy.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you look at it, I think we've got enough cell coverage in my area anyway. Nobody ever complained about not having coverage. So their excuse is that they need more coverage because the load's going to get that much more on the network, and so they need more cell towers. So I think that in residential areas particularly, we shouldn't be erecting more cell towers. There's enough coverage. We should be rolling out fiber in residential areas.
But you have fiber in your area already.
It's being rolled out right now.
Yeah. So there's nothing wrong with what you've been doing for decades of picking up a telephone in your home and using that to make a communication.
Exactly.
No, I mean, that's great. I mean, any other parting advice or support? What's your recommendations for what does your group need more?
Well, we need people to sign up. That's really what there's strength in numbers. The more people that join up, the better. It will help our cause and everybody else's, because we're doing this for everybody, whether you've joined up or not, or whether you agree with us or not, we're doing it for you.
Yes. And so how do you avoid that whole thing of, tinfoil hat syndrome issue? How do you guys, what makes you guys different to being successful versus the others that get called that?
Well, I just let it roll off my back because I kind of anticipated conspiracy theorists, whatever, all those names. I think it's just a means to try and stifle debate. So I actually wear the conspiracy theorist badge with pride because to me it means I'm a thinker and not a sheep. And so, yeah, you can call me what you like. It doesn't bother me.
And it is also difficult because I'd find even with the persons that speak out is that they themselves, I had it myself as well, where you following a certain, you can easily get fooled into following a new type of sheep leading kind of campaign. And you actually end up saying we're doing right, but we actually end up doing harm at the same time or making things worse. Like you mentioned earlier, okay, we put sunblock on. So avoid the radiation, put sunblock on. It's like, actually, hey, putting on sunblock is going to make us worse. And it gets more complicated with the biology and the physics and those aspects. But it's the thing of, always being willing and needing to be more open-minded and evolving with this process. Otherwise, it's going to be a thing of you implement one solution, ends up being detrimental further down the line. Or being in court and being called a hypocrite or something.
Yes.
And that's the important thing people not to worry about because your character is going to always be tarnished. And that's what the importance is of a experienced and supportive litigation team like you're having connections with now, because it's their job to narrate the story for you.
Yes.
In court, a lot of stuff is done behind the court scenes, with the politics and negotiation there. And then in court, it's about how the story is narrated that's going to win it.
Yeah.
Facts can be there, but it's how that story is told.
Yeah. Well, I think there are a couple of ways it can be tackled in court. The one, as you said, is that they're meant to protect our rights and our environment. So we have to have a safe environment. But the other is experimentation, that we have to give consent. And as you said, they're testing 5G in Pretoria now. And I believe that it's Verizon from the States that's doing their 5G testing in South Africa at the moment. Yeah,
the actually is the company that actually does most of the... There's a company that comes from the United States that's built most of the infrastructure in South Africa, and then the telecoms lease that infrastructure from them. Okay. And that has some good legal loopholes because bypass liability and different issues. But so essentially it's American original company that builds the infrastructure, and the telecoms will just lease that infrastructure. Kind of like property management and development kind of thing. So yeah, they doing the rollouts and the testing, and then they just have the customers come on.
So essentially we're the guinea pigs of the world then. I mean, if they're testing the technology here, because nobody knows what it's going to do to us health-wise, really. We're the guinea pigs, and that's against our constitution.
Yeah. Well, they're doing their mandate on testing the engineering aspect and topology. I mean, that's why you have in the UK these big, 400 or 500-year-old trees being chopped down because it interferes with 5G signaling. And that's the nice thing is South Africa is that our different environmental protection laws are in a way more powerful, and that's why in the cases up in Gauteng where the endangered species are brought up, the cell towers don't go up. They actually chased away because then they have to reconduct a whole new EIA study, which they can't do because it's an original EIA. So South Africa has this heritage of it wants to connect with nature, wants to protect nature, but with this whole thing of non-native EMF, the biggest stumbling block is this bullshit language of so many different words. Even the whole thing of multiple chemical sensitivity and EHS, they're the same thing. And then you have EHS and EMFIS. And again, this whole thing, I want to get state disability grant like you, James, so I can get pocket money from the government. And actually, you don't want that. It doesn't work. There's different ways about it. If you are incapacitated from the radiation, South African government actually does subsidize you in a much more better way through the tax system. So your treatment, your equipment, all these different protection mechanisms, shielding, all those things is subsidized by the government. So why would you want to fight and go for this measly pittance 800 Rand a month living in a shack kind of crap scenario when, hey, have SARS pay you, depending on your income scenario or caring for your loved ones, a couple of 100,000 Rand a year, depending on what your different circumstance, not for everyone, but it is. And that, from my understanding, has a much more powerful impact because people then are able to understand it's not this thing of it's only, one thing and we just stop the one thing. It's you have to encompass the different parts of the EMF spectrum all in one in order to actually have people have that better consciousness understanding. And how the best thing for heroin addicts, actually the treatment they found is putting the person in the sun. Gaming addiction, the moment you switch off the blue light effect, I actually have a couple of clients. One guy's also below 25, his friend as well. Used to be serious game addiction, works in IT. Another one also PTSD, tried to commit suicide a couple of times. Implemented a different protocol. They actually, before they'll be on the weekends and on the evenings, they want to just be gaming. They stayed inside the whole time, binge watching. Now they don't do that anymore. They're outdoors the whole time.
Fantastic.
They find it more addictive to do that than being in their space.
That is great.
So again, for your listeners, for your group members, being more open to different language and simplifying things is much simpler. And that's why, again, this whole thing of social BE or cultural thing, you want to stray away from this it's a white disease issue because it's never going to work for you. And when they get to more translate the language of like SARTU, it's how it's affecting people themselves and the communities. And it's not this whole them must go to Sangoma thing. Then it makes a lot more sense. And there's a reason when you understand that physics and science to explain it, then you understand why there's certain cultural practices to do things differently. So Derek, any final words for?
That's about it. So we encourage people to join us because we want to take this fight up and believe it's necessary, and we want to get some legal clarification.
There you have it, listeners. Derek Maine from the National Alliance of Anti-Cell Mast South Africa. I much prefer the acronym. It's a lot easier to pronounce than the whole words. But hoping, a few seeds of today will help expand of not just cell masks, but other aspects. And it's not just about cell phones, it's multiple technologies.
Yes, absolutely.
For more, visit www.nicheradio.co.za.